When we think of royal and royal history, I'm like you, I just like to know the inside track on how certain things happened. And there were certain regal people, literally, that really stamped their mark on the world. One of them would have to be, of course, the late Queen Victoria. Her name still is up and down the United Kingdom. Victoria Gardens, Victoria Fountains, Victoria Station, you name it. She made sure that she was going to live on. Talk about being an influencer and a brander long before, of course, it was known. And also, let's not forget the Royal Albert Hall, named, of course, in the honour of her late husband, Prince Albert. You see, Victoria had a very checkered life when you think about it, because the bottom line with her was that, she'd had power at a very young age, and so really had been incredibly spoilt and knew exactly what she wanted. And in a time where nobody really dared answer back to the monarch, there were very few people that could say no. But of course, it was her private life that really raised a few eyebrows many years later, seemingly because after the departure of Prince Albert, she seemed to be rather erratic in her choices of friends and companions, shall we say. But none other more so than this particular man that literally rocked the monarchy to its foundations, and all over a few jars of spices. Let me explain. Morning, good to see you today. Thank you so much for your time. I hope you're all right. I don't know about you, but I do find this sort of thing. So you're waving back. Sorry, I know I should wave. Well, you're still waving. If you stop now, well, that's all right. No, I've stopped now. You've stopped, definitely. Yeah, okay. We have to be sure, don't we? We have to make sure we get that in, No, I find it fascinating, as I say, because working with the Royal Collection Trust and many others, historic royal palaces, you get to learn some stories that don't necessarily make it into the public domain. And when you look at these, when you look at sort of letters written over 150 years ago, and you think that they just sat down at a desk and wrote it and had no idea that in, all of this period to come, we would be analysing it with such a degree. But you see, when you think about it, you look at sort of royal servants, and there are very few that have sort of hit the heights that this particular sort of person did. Abdul Karim. Now, you may have known the story, of course, all thanks to the brilliant portrayal of Queen Victoria by Dame Judi Dench in the movie. And it was a very successful movie because it wasn't necessarily a story that was that well known. Now, the background goes, of course, that suddenly he became her favourite servant, and not only that, had his own sort of places that he was able to live in Kensington, Windsor, Buckingham Palace. She literally thought the world of him. Some people suggest he was more like a son. And the thing was, he was a very clever manipulator when you read detailed sort of ideas of exactly how he did it, He came with a poor sob story, made sure that he brought his wife over here, children, that sort of stuff. And then the bottom line really was he kind of worked her like a spinning top because he knew that she liked him. I mean, he was a dashingly good-looking guy when he first came over. And of course, she was a woman of a certain age, easily flattered. This is the follow-on, of course, from the Scottish man that was John Brown. Of course, the other movie with Dame Judi Dench, Mrs. Brown. So you can understand how this worked. But like a lot of servants that fall foul in their favour, as it were, and I suppose in the modern day term, you might say the Diana Butler, the man who claimed that he was a rock, Paul Burrell, well, he came to a rather sticky end, didn't he? It didn't necessarily work out in his favour, whichever version of events he paints. But this particular man, Abdul Karim, as I say, was very clever, a very shrewd manipulator. You see, after the demise of Queen Victoria, the bottom line was that he thought, well, I'm home and dry now. But you know the story. They quickly swept in, took away all of her letters that she'd written to him, burnt them, booted him out and sent them back to India. Well, that's what they hoped to do at least. But what you find out a little later is the fact that he was an ingenious businessman. You see, along the way, he'd managed to make Queen Victoria enjoy chicken curry, along with his wonderful herbs and spices and everything that he brought over with him to make these particular dishes very successful, that remains so even to this day. In fact, once it got out that she liked this, lots of other people wanted to sample it. She was the forerunner, if you like, of making sure of what we like as a sort of takeaway snack today. But what was fascinating was, afterwards, the king, of course, King Edward, he had a bit of a problem with Abdul Karim. Not because he had the problem of his mother and that sort of relationship, But it was the fact that he decided to do one of the very first influencer branding things with the monarchy. You see, he'd already developed and almost patented a register for his own spices, as of course loved, admired and tasted by the late Queen. And this took, according to a very well-placed source, as ever we have to say allegedly, a really big amount of money to make sure that this couldn't happen. You see, this was a different era. The Edwardian era had people now who were far more educated and knew exactly how to stand up for themselves. And basically Queen Victoria had educated Abdul to such a way that he knew how to fight back. It took really to the 11th hour to maybe just squash this, so that ultimately his sort of marketing, branding plan, influencer if you like, was never going to see the light of day. But it's fascinating to think that clearly behind the scenes somebody somewhere was plotting this all along. According to him and those documents, she was very much in favour of this, which is a strange thing to think, considering the fact that she couldn't really be bothered to celebrate her Diamond Jubilee unless he was present with her. You see how this works. The wonderful influence that he literally had over her was amazing, and this is what really stunned the rest of the royal family. But either way, King Edward finally was more powerful. Of course, the one thing he didn't win was, of course, one of his mistresses, Lily Langtry, who simply dismissed his claim of her promoting Pear soap as nonsense. I'm doing it. As ever, a woman tends to be a little bit stronger in these battles. Abdul Karim found that he couldn't take on the king, although he managed to persuade Queen Victoria that he literally was the spice of her life. Neil Sean in the very heart of London.